In an earlier episode of this series, I revealed the interview tape with a schizophrenic dope informant named Michael Robinson, who had become a jailhouse informant after getting locked up a couple months before Biggie was killed.
This is a tape-recorded interview with Michael Robinson.
That interview launched Detective Russell Poole's Amir Muhammad theory for Biggie's murder. And even though Robinson proved in that interview that he knew nothing about the case, I mean a comical lack of information about Biggie's murder, it still led somehow to the FBI taking him down to Chula Vista years later to confront Amir Muhammad face to face at Amir's house on this street. And this is the story about the dumpster fire that this encounter turned into. Hey! So to recap, Psycho Mike Robinson was a career criminal who also made money off of being a street dope informant. So cops would give him $20, he'd buy drugs at a drug house, he'd come out, show the cops the drugs, and then they'd raid the house. And he was very good at it, and doing buys for law enforcement was apparently a regular source of income for him. He was a stereotypical street informant that all drug enforcement uses. But on January 20th, 1997, Robinson commits an armed robbery in a parking garage, telling the victim he has a gun in his pocket and taking the man's wallet and keys. So when Biggie was killed, Robinson had already been locked up, awaiting trial for the robbery and drug possession for nearly 2 months, and had lost the income he made as a street informant. And this time, he's facing a third strike conviction. He's facing life in prison. And the trial date for that case is coming right up. It's set for August 18th, 1997. So he has added incentive to give police useful information, and he only has a few months to do it. So in the weeks leading up to that trial date, Robinson is suddenly calling everybody from jail with all kinds of stories. On May 29th, nearly 3 months after Biggie's murder, we have what may be the first contact between Robinson and the Biggie murder detectives, where they learn he's a drug informant for the feds and the LA County Sheriff's Department. He has information he overheard 2 other inmates discussing about a different case on a bus while they were going to court together. A month later, on July 1st, he does an interview with LAPD detectives Ball and Carr and a deputy named Schultz. Robinson admits he's a snitch for various agencies, and even though Ball and Carr are working on Biggie's case, Robinson wants to tell them about a case where a car was taken and a police officer was shot. And then on July 10th, he gives the big interview that I played in an earlier episode, where Robinson gives the name Amir and 4 other potential names for Biggie's murder. And in that same interview, he also informs on a completely different murder case from way back in the 1970s.
Tell me about the police officer. It was a Los Angeles police officer that got killed?
Yes.
When did the murder occur?
Well, I think 74 or 75. I haven't seen it for a year.
So he's digging deep to find anything that'll help his situation. In another note about Robinson in the case files, he supposedly ID'd the photo of Gary Brentz, aka Dutchman, and claims that he's a friend of Amir's. In those same notes, he claims another friend of Amir's is someone named Stutterbox, which is a name that will come up again shortly. In these first few months of the investigation, the biggest rumor on the streets was that the Southside Crips had killed Biggie over an unpaid debt. And it's clear in this interview that Robinson was just regurgitating that rumor about the Crips, so he could keep getting paid as an informant and maybe get a break on this case that was coming up. He described the shooter as being a Southside Crip from Compton.
So at one point he was associated with either the Southsiders.
Yeah.
And he says the guy lives in the Southside Crips neighborhood in Compton.
Do you know where he lives?
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly what it is. I know the house is out there. Be over there off of Greenleaf and off of Johnson.
And he said the guy's non-Muslim name was Kenny or Kiki.
Do you know what they used to call him When he was a Southside?
Might be Kiki or Kiki or something like that. I don't know.
Which sounds a lot like Keefe, the famous shot caller for the Southside Crips at the time, who Robinson probably would have at least heard of. So Robinson is in jail, and he's getting this information from his cousins in Compton.
Yeah, I told you my cousins. I got cousins that deal with the guy, still sees the guy.
And it's obvious that he's trying to repeat this widespread rumor there at the time that the Southside Crips killed Biggie over an unpaid debt. And then we get to the name Amir. Robinson only gave a first name in this interview. He didn't say the name Muhammad. And the LA Times had run the first composite sketch of the shooter 3.5 months before this interview. So everybody knows they're looking for someone dressed like the Nation of Islam. So Robinson throws out a common Muslim name that he supposedly heard from his cousins on the outside.
Your cousins are telling you that Amir
is the gunman.
Yeah, but Amir. Okay.
And he also said the guy was known for rolling around town in a white stretch limo.
Do you know what kind of car that this Amir drives?
White stretch limo.
And that's where we come back to Stutterbox. Stutterbox was a well-known figure in Compton who was known for driving around in a white Rolls Royce. And one of Stutterbox's aliases was Amir Muhammad. For the record, Keefe and Stutterbox had nothing to do with Biggie's murder, but somehow we're supposed to believe that a mortgage broker from the East Coast who went to college in Oregon is actually a Crip bodyguard from Compton and friends with all these figures in Compton's drug and gang circles. It's ridiculous. Robinson also knew none of the details about how Biggie was killed. He didn't know where it happened.
Let me ask you this, do you know where Biggie was killed?
No, like I said, I don't read that type of stuff.
He didn't know how it happened.
I heard somebody just walk by, shot him in his truck 5 or 6 times through the door of the truck or something. Just heard he shot, they went by, shot by with a machine gun or something.
He didn't know how the gunman escaped.
How did the guy get away? Did you ever hear anything about that?
He ran around the corner and got in a limo or a truck or something, drove off him.
He didn't know anything. And while Robinson was considered reliable as a dope informant, he was considered far less reliable when it came to anything else. He was schizophrenic, and notes in the case files mention a chemical imbalance, paranoia, and that he was on medication. And while the book Labyrinth, which pushed Poole's theory, claimed that Robinson was a, quote, ultra-reliable informant, his handler at the LA County Sheriff's Department, a sergeant named Valdemar, said that Robinson had been tested as both reliable and unreliable in the past, and that he was prone to receiving hearsay and adopting it to his own observations or overhears. In other words, Robinson would overhear people talking about something they saw or did, and then adopt their story as his own, as if he had actually lived it, instead of it being hearsay. And Robinson had provided information on other cases before that turned out to be false. Like one major case involving the first ever murder of a female Secret Service agent in the line of duty, where Robinson named a suspect and claimed he helped him bury the murder weapon in a field. But when police dug the whole field up, they found nothing. And a few years later, they arrested a completely different suspect for that murder than the individual Robinson named as the killer. So Michael Robinson had falsely accused someone of a high-profile murder before. And repeating hearsay as his own observations is also exactly what he did in his Biggie case interview, where he gave the name Amir. He even lets it slip at one point, saying that he can't write, so he had to memorize everything he's telling them.
I don't know how to read and write, so I have to try to remember everything was being said, because I don't remember everything exactly because I don't read and write.
But he's talking like he personally knew this person. But if he had to memorize this information, then clearly he didn't. And even though Robinson claimed he had known this Amir or Ashmir person for years.
How long would you say you have known this man?
About 5 years, 10 years, maybe longer, 12.
The physical description that he gave of this person did not match Amir Muhammad at all.
What's he described as?
About 6'1", maybe 6'2".
How much did he weigh?
So about 2:20, 2:30.
And when he was shown a photo six-pack that included Amir's photo, Robinson circled half the pictures, which included Amir's. He would admit later that he actually didn't know what Amir looked like, even though he'd claimed to have known the guy for years, and that he'd just guessed. Circling half the photos gave him a 50-50 chance of being right. But then, months later, Russell Poole, a detective on the Biggie case at the time, sees that someone named Amir Muhammad visited an LAPD officer named David Mack in jail after Mack was arrested for robbing a bank. Amir was a college friend of David Mack and his wife. He visited Mack in jail, supposedly at the request of Mack's wife, because Amir was a mortgage broker, and they wanted to refinance their house to help with the financial burden of what Mack was dealing with. Some false information has been spread about this jailhouse meeting, originally spread by Russell Poole, and then by various supporters of his since then. As one example, in 2018, an article about the case was published by the Daily Beast, and it focused on a former FBI agent who believed Poole's theory. And the article was written by a guy who would later launch a podcast with that FBI agent. This article repeats some of the same false information that had been spread by Poole before, claiming that when Amir visited Mack in jail, on the login sheet, Amir had given a phony address, social security number, and phone number. But My Film Murder Rap proved most of this wasn't true nearly a decade ago.
The book Labyrinth claimed that Amir had also put down a fake home address and an out-of-service telephone number. However, the address on the form matched the one on his driver's license, and there was not even a place on the form for a telephone number, so he hadn't even listed one. We also saw that he had listed his correct driver's license number and his birth date. So if he's trying to hide his identity, why does he use his correct address, his correct driver's license number, and his correct birth date?
The only information that was false was Amir's social security number, and he claimed that was because he didn't trust having that information on a form in a jail where someone might use it to steal his identity. So even though Robinson's interview in 1997 had been dismissed by the other detectives on the Biggie case as obvious nonsense, 6 years later, in December of 2003, an FBI agent decides to take Robinson down to the suburbs of San Diego to have him confront Amir Muhammad face to face at his house while wearing a wire. But I have never heard any audio of this conversation or read any transcripts. But in 2004, Amir Muhammad, aka Harry Billups, gave a deposition to the attorneys for Biggie's estate, explaining what happened, which I think may come as a surprise to a lot of people who followed this story. And is this perspective one-sided? Sure. Unfortunately, this statement, given under oath, is the only side we have to go on. But in addition to what he said happened, you're going to see that Muhammad's actions after this encounter were not the actions of a guilty person. So it's 8:30 at night, and it's December, so it would have been dark outside. And Michael Robinson walks up to Amir Muhammad's house and knocks on the front door. And according to the FBI agent running this operation, Robinson and Muhammad have about a 45-second conversation in which he thinks they know each other. Of course, we know from Robinson's 1997 interview that he seemed to have no idea who Amir Muhammad was, getting where he was from and his physical description completely wrong. And we have no audio or other proof of this claim about their encounter. But Amir Muhammad was asked about this moment in his deposition, and he gave us a bunch of details about what was actually said from his perspective. And when I recreated this moment in my Murder Rap documentary, the actor's dialogue was pulled from this deposition. Robinson supposedly asked, "You do real estate, right?" And then,
"I need to talk to you."
"You need to talk to who?"
"You heard me, need to talk to you."
And Muhammad asks, "Who are you looking for? If you can't tell me who you're looking, get away from my door. Who are you looking for?" According to an FBI agent who was there, Robinson was dressed like a gang member when this happened. And Muhammad said in the depot that he thought maybe the guy had the wrong house. But when Robinson wouldn't say who he was looking for, Muhammad finally just closed the door. So, think about this. It's after dark, and the FBI just sent a schizophrenic, convicted murderer named Psycho Mike to some mortgage broker's house in the suburbs. And this bizarre encounter clearly disturbed Amir Muhammad, because that night he called the police and made a report. And that probably should have been the end of it. But the FBI and Psycho Mike weren't done yet. The next morning, Robinson comes back for round 2. And since the police had advised Amir to call 911 if this guy came back, that's exactly what he did. He doesn't go to the door, he calls the local police. And again, Robinson leaves before the police arrive. But he comes back 10 minutes later, and Amir says he can hear Robinson talking to someone on the phone saying, "I'm outside the door now." And Robinson is ringing the doorbell when the cops arrive. And according to Muhammad, this pisses Robinson off. And he yells, "You're going to be sorry you called the police. I'm from the pen. We'll be back. You're dead." And he slips a business card into Muhammad's door with a phone number written on it before the police escort him off the property. So this operation is turned into a cluster. A local cop is there, and now the FBI agents have to get out and get involved. And they tell the local cop that it's an FBI operation and they don't want Robinson's name going into the police department system because he's a confidential informant. So the local cop doesn't really make like a complete report, and that angers Muhammad because he wants to file a report. So he immediately goes to the Chula Vista Police Department and demands that they make a full report of the incident. And when that doesn't work, he goes to the district attorney in downtown San Diego. So first Amir Muhammad calls the police, then he goes to the police station in person, demands they file a report, and then he goes to the DA. Is this what a hardcore gang hitman does? Runs to the police to get even more law enforcement involved in this case? Can you imagine a real gang enforcer like, I don't know, Wardell Poochie Faust, running to the police and demanding they open an investigation? I mean, but it is what a professional living in the suburbs would do. So Amir Muhammad is at the DA's office, and an investigator there calls the number on the card that Robinson left behind, and they pretend to be Muhammad asking, what is this about? And the person on the other end says, "You know what this is about. I'm from the pen. This is about the murder of Biggie." "5 months after giving this deposition, Amir Muhammad was dropped from the Biggie Estates lawsuit. So, within less than a year of the FBI sending Michael Robinson to confront Amir Muhammad at his house, Muhammad was dismissed from the lawsuit. So about a year and a half after this encounter with Amir Muhammad, Robinson does a deposition with the Biggie estate, and that's where his claims were finally challenged by the city's attorneys. And that results in him recanting and having a meltdown and running onto the nearby freeway. Some of Poole's associates have claimed that it's a lie that Robinson recanted during this deposition. And yet, weeks later, the Biggie estate dropped David Mack from their lawsuit against the city of LA. So at that point, both David Mack and Amir Muhammad had been dropped from the lawsuit. And according to the LA Times, court papers indicated that Mack had agreed not to sue the estate for malicious prosecution. And weeks earlier, the FBI had already shut down their investigation. And really, that should have been the end of it. Because once you realize Robinson's identification of Amir Muhammad was false, you remove the whole catalyst for Poole making Amir his suspect in the first place. You then have to either believe Poole got lucky with a 1 in 20 million shot and lucked into Biggie's killer off of a bogus tip, or accept that Poole picked a suspect before he knew anything about the guy, staked his reputation on it being right, and then worked backwards, cherry-picking only the evidence that fit his theory, like when he took the name Amir from Robinson's interview and ignored everything else Robinson said. It no longer matters if a witness years later thinks they saw a face in a crowd of hundreds that may have been one of Poole's suspected conspirators, or if they think blurry video shows one of his suspects, because the whole theory was started by bullshit. And I don't think you should spend decades accusing a man of murder based on that. One of my favorite true crime films is Zodiac by David Fincher. In it, Jake Gyllenhaal is a newspaper cartoonist who becomes obsessed with the Zodiac murders. And there's a scene with him and lead detective, played by Mark Ruffalo, where Jake's character is chasing wildly at various suspects, and Ruffalo cuts him off.
We ran them on Rick Marshall.
No, Robert.
No, I know you don't think it's him.
No,
but I think that
no,
Marshall
I'm
knew
not having
Darlene,
this
and I can't
conversation
talk to
with you.
Majot
Robert,
or Linda, so I'm going to talk to Bob.
Robert,
Bob.
stop
What?
it.
What?
Okay, the Rick Marshalls of this world will suck you dry. They're blind alleys.
The Tupac and Biggie cases are full of blind alleys, like Amir Muhammad. I know, because I've been down most of them.